Welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Jake. Welcome to Wu Dao Music. This is going to be my first video. I'm going through some of the basics for the Xiao, kind of introducing you to this instrument or going over some more details that you're going to use as a reference in your path learning more about this really versatile instrument. A quick introduction. You might know me. I've been living and training martial arts in Wudang, China for just about 10 years now. I've been playing the flute for about the last 2 or so years of that. Mostly self-study, a little bit of training here with other musicians in the school and in the area. But a lot of it I've picked up on my own over just being around it and just practicing, looking up a lot of resources online, which kind of leads me to bringing and building this channel, Wu Dao. Part of this channel is just for me to share the music that I've been playing or making. This flute's really special to me. I really love the sound. You've probably heard it everywhere. Maybe you started practicing as well if you found an instrument yourself to start playing. But in the beginning you might find the same difficulty that I found, is that there's no real online database or source in English for you to access much information about this. You can find a little bit of basic info, like you can find photos, you can find lots of music tracks, but not so much about how to step-by-step instruction. I want to see if I can offer what I know, start a conversation, share information, you know, grow the conversation around this instrument, because as far as the popularity of it is in China right now, it's relatively unknown in the West on its own. You'll see a lot of the instruments it's paired with. You'll see the guqin, you'll see the gujian, you'll see the deeds, you'll see the shun, you'll see lots of different types of wind instruments as well. But the Xiao is really unique in that it's the most versatile and highly adaptable to all these different instruments. And even more in the West, that I'm really surprised I haven't seen it as much as I thought I would, right? So this channel, this is going to be a little bit introduction, a little bit tutorial, a little bit step-by-step practice. Hopefully you can use that. Hopefully this is a great tool, a great home base for you to come into and learn some of these basics and follow along and, you know, progress to a point where you can listen to those tracks and you can play on your own. One thing to say about this though, like I said, I'm not a professional musician. I'm going to be keeping things really simple. You don't need to have any musical background to understand what we're going to go through with in these videos, in this introduction video and the videos that will follow. You just need to be able to pick up some rhythm, you know, and in time you're going to train your ear to pick up on the different sounds and notice the differences in the changes in tempo and tone. But there's no necessary need to have a musical theory background to understand these lessons. Even the notation, I'm gonna show how to read the classical, like jianpu, the notation that specifically is used for most instruments in traditional China, which is really easy to use. If you know tablature, it's basically substitution with numbers. So it's going to be a lot simpler than your bar notation that you have in the West. So even this is going to be a little bit simple, running through the notation, and that'll equip you with a really easy way to go online and find new music. But also, Wu Dao, I want it to be the database for a lot of this English translation. So there's links in the description below that's going to take you to my website. There's a whole section dedicated to music practice. Everything that I'm going to explain in here is in there in written form. There's also tracks, there's sheet music, recordings, there's some basic introduction stuff. But I wanted to offer this video as more interactive to explain kind of in a more tactile way what I feel about the Xiao. So I hope this video kind of reaches you and you can reference it. I'm going to put some timestamps in the link below, so you can also kind of jump forward through the video and come back to this and use it as a resource. There's also going to be lots of things to download in links. There's some sheet music, basic drilling, notation explanations. There's some good apps for metronomes that I will link down there. So yeah, feel free to drop down there and check it out. We're going to go through it step by step, and you know, sub and leave a comment. If there's something that you don't see answered in this video or something that you're more interested in, leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you, and we can build forward, maybe include that in some of the later tutorials. All right, let's get started. First thing we want to talk about before we start picking up the flutes and moving through some of the explanation, is I do think it's necessary to kind of have a little bit of background about the history. We don't have to go really in depth, but it's good to have a little bit of understanding how it was created, and then you can see the different variations that came off this flute and why we have so many different woodwind instruments in China. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about this flute. Okay, so you have your traditional, okay, this is a vertically blown flute. Okay, we call this maybe a changdi or a shudi. Okay, so shudi literally means vertically played flute. Okay, the changdi, the reference point for that is that historically this particular variation of a flute was really popular in Sichuan and Gansu province, so with the Chang people. So this flute kind of became known for them. But also this is like one of the reasons it was so well known and such a big historical background is that the same reason why it should be famous today. It's convenient, it's easy, it's a stick, you can have it smaller pieces, you can break it apart, you can have lots of different variations of it. So it became very popular. You know, you can imagine this traveling down like the Silk Road, traveling all over the world. This is really, really easy to use and very durable, very versatile. And you can accompany music from all over these different parts of Asia. So you'll have variations of bamboo flutes, okay? You'll have variations of this in India, in Japan, in China, and Mongolia. You'll have all sorts of different types of iterations of this particular flute. So we're going to talk about why the Xiao is particularly special. So to do that, we take it back, we can say like, oh, some of the oldest findings of these types of flutes, you know, you can say 8,000 years. You know, these flutes have been made out of bird bone, they've been made out of ivory, jade, stone, porcelain, wood, and bamboo. With really what we're going to be talking about is the most important is bamboo, or more often purple or black bamboo. This is just higher quality, it resonates, it's got a more durable, it grows really well. So this is typically what you're going to find Xiao is made of. You can't really just use any old piece of bamboo. You know, you get big chunks like this, you might be able to make a sound out of it, but it's going to be hard to make a seal. So particularly purple bamboo, because of the uniform nature of it, the way it grows, the way it dries, and the way it kind of maintains its structural integrity even after it's been made into a finished product, basically. You're going to have flutes with different number of holes, different placements, because nothing's been standardized at that point. So historically, we're talking about woodwinds being around since the Han Dynasty and before. But really what became standard didn't come till much later. Nowadays we have these 8 holes, you know, we have 4 here, 3 here, and 1 on the back. We have this type of flute now. But traditionally, some of these flutes, they only had maybe 6 holes, or 5. It became standard to have a certain number of holes, a certain style of make, about in the Jin Dynasty. So they start kind of saying, okay, we're gonna have this many. The placement's going to be deemed here, so we all have the same notation, we all have the same system, basically. So they started systemizing it around then. But then the name's still kind of been up. If you say Xiao at this time, there's another type of flute, a woodwind, where it's Pai Xiao. So it's called like a row of flutes. So you have like all the different lengths of bamboo, and you play it, and so that's going to be, that started to be referred to more as the Xiao, and this was referred to as the Shudi, or just Di. But then you have another flute that came up, really got popular in the Tang Dynasty. And you have the Dizi, which you've probably seen more of. There's lots more information about it, and it's more popular because it's a little bit more of an upbeat instrument than the Xiao would be. And I have one here, so that would be the Dizi. So the Dizi is a transverse flute. The Dizi is played sideways, much the same notation, the same type of way of holding, different number of holes, but with a side hold like this. This I don't know so well, still studying. Hopefully maybe in the future we'll have some more tutorials on this, but there's lots of information on the Dizi available. This is a lot more popular because this has a lot higher range and therefore a more upbeat type personality when you play. There's also a lot of specialties with this flute. That'll be another time. So that became known as the Dizi in the Tang Dynasty. So that's when they really adopted the name, okay, Pai Xiao for this one, and this one we're going to call Xiao, okay? Then in the Ming Dynasty, relatively recent in history, is when they standardize the whole thing, finalize the name. Okay, this is a Xiao. We're going to start having 8 holes because that makes it a lot easier to play the notation, which we'll get to later in the video. You can just use whole finger transitions, which makes the flute more versatile. It gives it a wider range, and it also makes it much easier to play. So that became standardized relatively recent. Traditionally, you can find a lot of flutes that have 6 holes, but the technique to play those can be a lot more complicated, basically. So modern flute, 8. Okay? So that kind of brings you up to date on like how the flute kind of came to be. But also on that tracks, you can imagine you have lots of variations. Nowadays we talk about 4. We talk about 4 main ones. Dongxiao is what we're going to refer to. It's what you're predominantly going to find. It's what you're going to practice everywhere, especially in like central China, around this area. These are all Dongxiao. You have a couple different variations of those, but Dong just means whole. So it's like a holed flute. So that's kind of what separates it from the Pai Xiao, for example, because the Pai Xiao is just a solid piece of bamboo with the length that differs the different tone, okay? So with this being a hold flute, okay, we understand we have finger positions now, okay, instead of just mouth positions. So the Dongxiao is referred to as this. Within the Dongxiao, you have a few specialty ones, okay? So we have the Bei, which we have northern, and we have the Nan, which we have southern. And we also have a Qin Xiao, which is a little bit special. So with the directions, the Bei Xiao, we're gonna have the northern flute, okay? This flute, a lot thicker, still made out of the same kind of material, bamboo, typically. It won't have a root system at the bottom, so it'll be a solid piece like this, and it'll have a really soft tone. So it won't have a lot of high-pitched piercing sounds. It won't have a real volume nature, similar to like the Diza, for example. With a Xiao, we get into a little bit more variety. With a southern flute, it's going to be a lot thicker, so kind of in similar material to this one with the depth. It's going to be really thick. Typically, it'll have the root structure, and typically it will have a special type where sometimes you even see the curve of the roots still attached to it. The flute itself is much shorter normally, and this gives it a really, really thick, deep volume and tone to the overall flute. So if you hear these really low kind of mantra, meditative type flute sounds, chances are it's a Nanxiao. Also, an iteration that came off of that was the Chiba, which means like a 1'8", which literally is the same kind of flute, much shorter, and they have a special type of cut on the front, like a V, and that gives it a lot of wind sound, whereas these are more clear. They have a seal to where the sound comes through very nicely. The Chiba kind of has like a loose, kind of wild tone to it. It makes it more wind, makes it more natural sounding. That version of flute actually became very popular in Japan and kind of took on its own life and became the shakuhachi. So you'll see that that's kind of an iteration of the Nanxiao. The Qin Xiao is a little bit special, more technical application, and it's very narrow. Like you could probably fit a Qin Xiao inside this flute. I don't have one to show you an example, but if I did, the holes are much tinier, the breathing space is much finer, and you have to be very precise with how you play. That makes the sound a lot better of a tone to go with the guqin, for example, because the guqin is typically played solo or accompanied with a xiao, but the volume of the guqin is not very loud. The sound only resonates within the instrument and the table. So it doesn't carry very far. It's a very intimate instrument. So you don't want the sound of that, the finger movements and things, and that stringed instrument being drowned out with a very heavy, thick dongxiao. So you might accompany that with a qin xiao as like a specialty. But as far as for like your own individual practice, a dongxiao is going to be the best because the volume is good for you to hear, for you to pay attention to, and for you to kind of feel the differences in the pitch and acclimate to the adjustments you can make when you're controlling the pitch in the octave. With the qin xiao, it's so fine, it makes it really technical, and it can be difficult to breathe consistently at that placement. Whereas the dongxiao is going to be a lot more simple and introductory, friendly to the amateur practitioner. Okay, so dongxiao is what you're going to be playing. Then we have to get into talking about the structure of the xiao itself. What makes them different from each other? If we have a dongxiao next to, say, another dongxiao, we're talking about a few main things. Okay, we're talking about the length, the make, the structure, the key. Okay, these are all really important. So we talked about before, we have 8 holes. This is going to be uniform across the size. But the distance of the holes determines the key. A D key flute, for example, like this one, is going to have a much lower tone than, say, your standard G or F. That also makes the spacing between finger positions wider. So because of that, sometimes the D or a C or maybe a flat B can be really difficult to play because the spacing is farther apart and it can be harder to reach down the flute to get all those notes clearly. For that reason, often you'll find a G or an F flute being your standard to start with, and that will be marked next to the 4th note progression on the flute. Which is another interesting detail about the flutes, is that they're not bottom note centric, they're 4th note centric. So when we say this is a G flute, we're not meaning this note when everything is pressed. We're actually meaning this note when the 4th note is open. So this is actually G. So that'll be a little confusing if you're switching from a Western notation to a Chinese. Just something to keep in mind. If a G flute, the lowest note on a G flute is actually D. So maybe you would call this a D flute in other senses. For Chinese notation, we're going to call this a G flute. So something to keep in mind as we go forward. G and F are going to be your standard, but if you have a lower key instrument that you're playing with, like a guzheng or something like that, a D key is really nice. Lower than that, they do have C, and there is a flat B, but they're very rarely used. I have a G, an F, and this D here. I also have an A flute, just for fun. It's very high. It's very small finger placements. I've never really used it that much. It's just kind of an experiment to have to see the differences, okay? But then your structure. You say, how do you pick a flute? You know, you can get a flute in China for anywhere from a couple hundred kuai to a couple thousand and up. So the variations, there's something different between those, right? So I'll give you kind of a basic overview of that. To start with, you're going to have your standard, your moderately priced one, which is like this one. I think I got this one for about 500 or 600 kuai, so close to $100 US. For this type of flute, you can see it's one solid piece, it's bare, there's no root system at the bottom, and so this is kind of just a moderate, like in the middle. So for this, you kind of have to think about like how a bamboo grows. Okay, you have your bottom piece, you have your middle sections, and you have your top sections. They're solid, each individual piece goes together, and when they make the flute, they knock the nodes out in between the different sections of the flute. So that makes the wind pass through, obviously. You have 2 different versions of that to seal it, where you have one with the mouth seal being open, to where you make the seal with your own chin while you're playing. And then you also have the versions that have the last node intact, to where this creates the seal, and all you do is have to blow in the correct position to make the sound come out clearly. So you have 2 different variations just in how it's made there, but then also the overall structure. You can have a flute like this, solid piece. You can have a flute solid piece with the root structure intact at the bottom, which is going to be like this G key, okay? So you can kind of see here, it's got a little bit wider of a bulge. This is pretty simple compared to most. Sometimes like the non-Xiao type versions, you can find a very large structure. The root system's still intact. That can kind of make the sound a little bit better to resonate, and maybe a little bit deeper, a little bit more clear and crisp. But at the beginning, that might not be a selling factor for you to actually say, oh, I prefer this flute, when you're still struggling to make a little bit of sound. But typically you're going to find the ones with the root structure in top or in the bottom a little more expensive than your other moderately priced whole pieces. You can pretty much think of that as, you know, every stalk of bamboo, you only get one of these. So you got one shot to make this piece worth it. And typically the material is much better to resonate a good sound with. So these are going to be taken care of a little bit more, and produce a little bit better of a sound. But with the flute being so versatile, you might not notice the difference in the beginning. The last version, which I don't have a version of to show you, but you've probably seen everywhere, is the kind of flute that you can deconstruct. So maybe you have 2 pieces, you have one metal copper link right here, or you have maybe another one here and you have 2, which makes it 3 separate pieces. This is for two reasons. One, really just for your convenience. You can twist it apart, take it completely down, and store it in a very small bag and carry it with you, which makes it really good for travel. The second thing is that if you have this connection up here, sometimes professionally, you can adjust the tone. You can attune your flute slightly. Because it is bamboo, it will change to a certain degree in temperature and humidity changes. It's not going to affect the flute on like a structural integrity very much, but if you're really fine-tuning your sound, it may have an effect when you're changing locations to play. So a professional player might have an adjustment to be able to, on the fly, move that around. In my opinion, I would say that typically you're going to be safest with a whole piece, just because they're going to be a little bit more moderately priced. If you find one of these root system ones, they could be just expensive just because of the root, just because of the aesthetic of it. And if you find the piece that come apart, they can be a little more upkeep, or you could potentially, instead of getting the good pieces, you could get the bad pieces. Of course, less likely to happen, and that's kind of like an individual opinion. You've got to try out a few to kind of see what you prefer. If it's more like this natural type look maybe that has you, or if it's more the convenience of breaking it down and traveling, that is also really nice. I've traveled with this with a hard case and used it as my carry-on. Not difficult to move around with a whole piece even. They can range anywhere from 60 centimeters to 100 centimeters. So you're looking at, this one's closer to a meter. Still relatively easy to get around with. There's no metal pieces, so they see it and they're like, oh, it's a sealed piece of bamboo. There's different selling points depending on what you're looking for, basically. Otherwise, you're definitely going to want one with a seal at the end, like these G's and F's over here. That's going to make it a lot easier to start with, but this is maybe a little bit of a challenge, a little bit more interesting to play. You get more sensitivity playing with this kind of open mouth seal at the end, which is really fun. So you're not really going to go wrong with any kind of style, but based on the quality or the craftsmanship of the flute, you're definitely going to get some variation. And you'll want to pay attention to like see what the reviews are like, make sure it's a reputable seller, make sure you can kind of, maybe you can practice it beforehand and see. That's the best. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much aesthetic. If we take one of these, my old F key flute, which is pretty beaten up, you've got this little black piece at the end, which could be plastic, but it's traditionally supposed to be like ox horn or bone. So this is carved and just sealed to the end of the bamboo, carved out on the inside and glued in. And this is just to protect the flute. So if you can see, this one's pretty banged up. I don't know if that'll make it out, but this is my travel flute. So this one's been moved around a lot and used as a walking stick and all sorts of stuff. So it's roughed up, but it keeps the end of the bamboo safe, which is the important part, because these ends are the most important. Otherwise, you'll notice these black wrappings around. Typically, like this is a thinner bamboo, so they wrap it because it will, like I said, it will flex and expand and contract in temperature changes and humidity changes. So because of that, it is wood. You do want to make sure it doesn't crack. So these wrappings are kind of like used on it to maintain the structure of it and keep it from adjusting too intensely. A little bit aesthetic too, but it just depends on the maker. So with these kind of ones, you know, it's a better seal. It keeps it kind of secure. But also because you look at the material of the bamboo, with this G key, for example, being a little bit more special and delicate of a type, like you can feel the weight of these different kinds of flutes, how light they are compared to, say, this D key flute. That bamboo is more susceptible to cracks because of the thinness. Whereas with this D, there's no wrappings. It's just a bare piece of bamboo, which I really like the look of, but it's able to do that because of the difference in thickness of these two flutes. So you can see the outer wall here, and then you can see the outer wall here around the mouthpiece. Very different. So this one is really not susceptible to cracks and breaks as easily as, say, one of these other higher key flutes are, which is maybe another benefit as well, as the durability of it. Either way, you do want to take care of them. They're really low maintenance, but you don't want to like put them in a dry environment back to a wet environment and keep doing that and making them damp and get condensation on them. If you do crack a flute, the awesome thing about them is they're really easy to take care of. If you get a crack in a flute, for example, with the wrappings, you can take the wrappings off, open it up, put a little super glue, put a little wax or something like that, and seal it back together, and it'll be good as new. As a matter of fact, this F key flute I cracked after 6 months of playing in the winter, but it cracked all the way down the front here, and you can kind of still see this is just tape. It was a cheap fix at the time, but I've never had any problems with it. So even just sealing it up just to cover it has made the tone tight again. Of course, this is a lower, cheaper end, like starter flute, so I'm not too worried about it. And the best way would be to take these wrappings off, reseal it, and rewrap it. But I just haven't had the time to break it down, or I haven't had the material to reset it. So it's not really necessary. If you break, you want to check for breaks around the holes. If it cracks around the holes, you can always add a little wax or something like that to seal that back up, just so you're not leaking air, basically, when you make notes. But otherwise, they're very easy to do on your own if you do have a problem like that. Not much you can do to mess up bamboo. It's been a building material for a long time, and it continues to be. So using this and having this around is really, really nice in an instrument. If you're coming from something that's really difficult to move around, or something that's really delicate and fragile, has lots of moving parts, this will be a very, very welcome addition to your retinue because of how easy it is. You just pick it up and play. Now we can get started on how to actually play the flute and the basics to your basic scale, your notation, and your first couple interludes into music. Okay? One more time, I want to reference you down to the description if you want to drop down and take a look at it now or throughout the video or at the end. Go ahead. There's going to be links in there from the video to the website where there's going to be more information, charts you can look at, examples of notation, a legend to read it, as well as a lot of tracks to listen to, and then look at the notation, kind of follow along so you can get a good feel for it. Another good tool that I put down there that I'm going to be throwing up on the screen every once in a while is this Pro Metronome. Any metronome app is going to use, I just put this one here for your reference, that's the one I'm going to use. In the notation you will find that a lot of the songs can be broken down into a different pace, as long as you're playing by yourself, just to kind of get a different feel for the song and feel out the different rhythms that you can do, or the different speeds that you can do the finger patterns. Okay, so download this on your phone. It's free. It's not a sponsor, but it is definitely an easy, simple to use tool. Or find one that you like. There's lots of other ones as well. Okay, so for your reference, in going forward in here, I'm going to be playing this flute. It comes through volume-wise a little bit more clear, a little bit softer. This is my D key flute, so it might not match you completely. I might jump back and forth between other flutes, but just remember that the finger notation can be the same regardless of what flute you're playing. So I'm going to be using this as a reference. It's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit easier to read on camera, so hopefully you'll be able to pick it up and notice and recognize what we're doing, and then move through with whatever key your flute is. You can use any key flute to play the same patterns, so you should be fine to get started. Okay, so first thing to talk about is how to hold it and how to make that sound. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is the top 3 holes are going to be covered by your left hand, and the bottom 4 holes are going to be covered by your right hand. Okay, that's because this hook on the end here, if you notice they're not quite straight, that one's hooked over. You've got to have your right hand down here. If you have your left hand, the pinky will not reach across to get to that one. Okay, so they're all made a certain way. If you play the transverse D, the D's as well, it's also played with the same fingering, minus a finger, minus a hole. Then when you're playing, the left hand is going to cover up the thumb hole on the back. Okay, so another little note, 2 more notes about holding. First thing is, whatever you're doing with your fingers, we're going to try to start working with the pads of the fingers. Okay, so we're going to work with at least this one, the first pads, but hopefully you're going to move forward and start using the full pad, the second articulated spot. So this is going to be a lot better as far as for speed and how do you say, sensitivity over each note progression that we do. You can play both ways, so if we cover all the notes and play our deepest tone, this finger position with just covered on the first, see, it makes these knuckles kind of come out a little bit, and more so if you have a smaller flute, this is going to be an okay seal. But if you're hooking up onto the fingertips, you're never going to make a good seal across each note, or you're going to miss slightly, and that if this note isn't clearly made, all these notes down here won't be clear as you play. So really important to get your hands to be flat at least. And if you can play the first pad, we can call this half piper. But if you can play all the way into the full, we call this full piper. So this is a little bit more professional, a little bit more clean. It might take a little bit more time to work on because you'll feel like you're not as sensitive there, but you'll develop the skill and the feeling. In the beginning, I have a habit of going back to here too. A lot of people do. Just don't curl your fingers up like this. If you curl up too much, especially with this top hand here, you're really going to start missing notes. So keep that flat. Second thing you want to do is remember our flat notes on the G scale are going to be this middle finger on the left hand and this ring finger on the right hand. So the third note and the second note up here. Those we're going to keep covered. Those are going to be your like root notes, your bass, to where you're just kind of keeping your hands there so you can hold the flute as you move through other progressions. So those, just for right now, for the basic scale, keep those in the same position. So make sure those have a good seal, okay? Last thing about how to make this sound, okay? Like I said before in the previous sections, this is really the unique part of the flute, is we don't have a mouthpiece. We have an open end. In the case of this Dong Xiao, we have a literal open end. So you're going to have to make the seal with your chin. But if we're talking about like a more moderate one that we're going to start with, we're going to have that seal across the bottom. So you'll notice the bottom of the breathing hole has this flat line, right? So that line is right where you're going to want to place the edge of the skin between the red and the white of your lip, like this area right here. It's very sensitive, so you should feel when you have it pressed up against. When you have it pressed up against, okay, we start with just all open, so you don't even have to do a note. You can just hold the flute to the side like this, okay? Then you want to make sure the notes face straight up, 45 degrees, so back straight, not too high or you're going to miss the note, and not too low or you're going to get just air, okay? So you want to even just hold it, no notes, you don't need to worry about anything at the beginning, and you just want to make a small, like as if you're pulling the back, and so you're kind of pressing down, you're blowing down like in a jug or something like that, but a lot more fine. So when you go, you put your lip right on that line, you know, make sure it's smooth, good seal, and just so the sound should be pretty even as it comes out. As we move through there, okay, we can move back to our root. Okay, so we can put a middle finger down, ring finger down, and then go ahead and put the thumb on the back too. This is going to be mi. This is going to be your number 3 note. So this is going to be really clear. Okay, so playing the scale down is really nice. You just add a finger, add a finger, add a finger. But we're gonna really want to start with our tone, with our lowest note. Okay, so now we get into the notation explanation. I'm gonna throw some reference points up on the video as we move through these tracks. We want to keep in mind the note that we're playing and the notation. In the beginning, we're just gonna say, okay, this is G key flute. Okay, G key notation. So the notation for a G key is actually going to start on the lowest note, is going to start in half a scale. So like we mentioned before, we have at least 2.5 octaves, scales that we can go up through. We have low, middle, and high. So because of that, we actually start the lowest notes on a half scale. We start, instead of starting with, okay, if you're familiar with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, we have this rising pentatonic scale. We use this in all of our jianpu, for the erhu, for the gujian, the guqin, and the xiao, dizi. They all use the same notation. So once you kind of get familiar with it, it's going to be really easy and standard to go to a different instrument and kind of understand basically what's happening. And you can integrate that into your own instrument very nicely. So when we start with this, if we see at the top of our sheet, it's 1 equals G. That's going to mean that 1, this note here, is G, our bass no is G. So that brings down here, that would make this a D. What we're going to do instead of using letters is we're going to use do, re, mi. So this becomes so, and as we take a finger off, we move up the scale into higher notes, okay? So if you say so, that's not do. We're not starting at the very base. We're starting at number 5, okay? So the notation reflects that. So with 5, so, we take one finger off, we go up to 6, la. Then we skip the ring, because remember that's our flat note, and we take the middle finger off. This is shi, or 7. One quick note, if you're using a Western do, re, mi, you're going to say ti or something different. The Chinese just say shi. It's the difference in the pronunciation. Same standard idea though, okay? So, la, shi. So these three are the low octave. They're the low notes. Then when we move up, now we start do. Remember, 1 is G. Do, re. Don't lift up the thumb, or the middle finger. And mi. Do, re, mi. Do, re, mi. Okay? From there, the notation will change. The finger positions will move a little bit. You're going to press these 3 down. Take the thumb off. Keep this one down there. And now this is fa. Then we repeat everything down. So, no thumb. So, la, shi, do, re, mi, fa. So, la. Now we take that pinky off, put the thumb back. Now la, shi, do, re, mi. Now once we get to this do the second time, now we're in the high octave. Okay, so do, re, mi. Then fa in the high octave is going to be different. It's going to be fa, 2 fingers, no thumb, instead of 3. And then this 3 fingers, no thumb, will be so. That's the high version. Okay, I'm going to go over this a couple times. For now, you don't need to worry about the high scale so much as the low and the middle. Okay, so we're just building up. We're just building up. Okay, so that's going to sound like this. So that works through all your scales, from the low to the high, 5 to 5. When we talk about the low scale notes, that's going to be marked on the paper as a number 5 with a dot underneath. Okay, with a dot underneath, that's going to be so. The same for la and shi, 6 and 7. That's going to be a 6 and a 7 with a dot underneath. So you know it's the low notation for that. When you get to the middle scale from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, shi, those 7 notes, that's going to have no dot. No dot below, no dot above. Middle scale, that's your basic center, okay? Then when you get to do the second time on the high scale, you have a 1 with a dot above. And so on. 2 with a dot above, 3 with a dot above, 4 with a dot above, and 5 with a dot above. Okay, no thumb. So that's going to be your basic notation. I put a drill sheet in the bottom that you can count off, and you can kind of practice the breathing, practice the notation. Work on your low and your middle first. Once you get to do the second time, once you get to that one position, the second time, stop there. Work on your breathing, get it really consistent and sustained until you move up into the higher notes, because chances are you're not going to be using those for a long time. Lots of songs just deal with basically 2 scales, so you're going to have a lot of range in the beginning just working with that. A couple other things you're going to need to know, and then in the next video we'll take you through one track to kind of get you the explanation, is when you look at these sheets of information, these jianpu, okay, these basic notation sheets, when you look at them, you're going to notice right at the top you got your 1 equals G, so we know it's a G key finger pattern. When we see the little bar note with the number, like 80, 100, 120, 60, that's going to be your beats per minute, so that's going to be your pace. This is where you're going to take your metronome and assign it to a certain pace so you can play along together. You know, you've got your 4 beats, typical in most tracks that we're going to go through. You also have a 2-beat song, 3-beat song. 4 beats is going to be your standard, so that's going to be your timing 4/4. When you have your 4/4, you know that each section, each bar in the notation following has 4 beats, 4, in each section. So that gives you like a placement, a standard to kind of listen to the song to. Then the numbers, okay, check out those sheets, follow along, do the breathing practices, start with 4 beats, move to 8 beats, sustain each note, do a breath, sustain the next note, do a breath, okay, and then keep moving forward until you get the low and the middle scales clear. From there you talk about your timing, okay, so you'll notice some of the notes are full, they're just a number standalone by their own, and some of the notes have underlines, okay. Every time there's an underline underneath a note, you cut the notation in half. So if it's, for example, in the Four Seasons song, the first note is a solid 3. So that becomes mi, one note, down, up, solid. The second note following that is a 3-2 with one underline underneath conjoining the two. That will be mi, re, so half a beat is mi, and the returning half beat is re. So that half line underneath basically cuts each one in half, makes them half notes, half beats. If you get into notes in later songs that we'll move into, you'll notice some with 2 or sometimes even 3 underlines underneath, and that just makes it from a half into a quarter into an eighth. So you're just basically, every underline cuts the note in half, and then from there you work with your beats, okay? So you have timing built into that. Again, dots underneath mean low, dots above mean high, no dot below or above means middle, okay? If you do have a dot next to it, to the right of the number, which we don't have in the first song, but in later songs we will, that will actually be add a half note, okay? So add a half note. So that can be like, if it's a 1 with a dot, then it's do, and then change on that and returning half. So you can get into a lot of music that has that extra half a beat. Again, that can be cut in half to a quarter if it's underlined, which will move forward as we get into other tracks. For now, download those files in the description, go through some breathing exercises, see if you can make some sound. It's going to take you a little bit of time just to get the clear notes to go through the whole thing. And as you make those clear, we'll start introducing tracks. In the next tutorial, we're going to walk through the first song, Four Seasons, give you a little background. That's going to give you something more tangible to practice. But until then, grab a flute, go through some of the progressions, get really familiar with thinking of do, re, mi, which number, 1, 2, 3, and which finger placement, and getting that very synchronized in your head. Because as we move through the songs, you're going to want to have that information ready to go, because the changes happen quickly. I hope this is a good introduction. You've kind of been able to follow along. If you do have any questions, drop those underneath. I'll get back to you, maybe include some more explanation in later videos. Follow through on the website. There's lots of really good resources there. If you like a certain track, drop the comment. We'll see if we can find the notation and go through it together. Otherwise, enjoy. Welcome to the world of Xiao. This has been Wu Dao, and I hope that you follow along in the next couple of videos and see what's happening. Enjoy.